And welcome yet again to the channel without a catchphrase, Everything is Interesting. And today, A is for Anticlimax. And as usual, if you want to get in touch with me, we're doing this the old-fashioned way. Send me an email. And if you suggest something that I might work with, I will send you this through the actual mail. So, let's get started on Anticlimax, a wonderful word which is usually used in literature. And it simply means the opposite of a climax. And the climax in literature is where everything sort of, all the big excitement that the story has been building up to through the whole novel finally pays off. Like the big action-packed moment that we've all been waiting for. The anticlimax is the opposite of this. Is where you build to something which does not happen. It does not occur. This is sometimes a good idea. It seems like it should never be a good idea, right? But it actually does work in some cases. For instance, in 1984, it works. The ending of 1984, 1984 is a classic book, of course. The whole thing about Big Brother is watching you, and the warning tale about totalitarianism, and how humanity and individualism is crushed under such a system, and it's become very symbolic for many reasons. The ending of that is quite anticlimactic. I won't spoil what it is, but it sort of ends in a disappointing way, but in the right kind of disappointing way, if that makes any sense at all. So in some cases, anticlimaxes are a good idea. Anyway, I don't want to talk about literature, really. I want to talk about history. I want to talk about when this stuff happens in real life, when life itself, when history itself is anticlimactic. Because there are stories to be found, because everything is interesting, of course. So we will find something fun to talk about here, too. I will start with a really always interesting, but really simple example of an anticlimax. Which is pay-per-view boxing. Now, I'm not a fan of sports. I'm going to have to admit that immediately. I do not like sports whatsoever. I don't judge people who do. Please don't judge me because I don't, but I really don't. I could not give a toss. But anyway, boxing is, I've been told, the discipline where people hit each other in the face until one of them wins. It's very, very complicated. And boxing matches can be very anticlimactic because they build so much tension and excitement, and like you're talking about the boxers are like dissing each other and talking naughty stuff about each other. I almost said a bad word there, gosh. Wait, I can say bad words. Shit. I just remembered that I'm not being censored. This is not 1984. They're talking shit about each other and saying like, oh yeah, your mother sucks eggs. Wow, take that, you boxer. You can tell that I'm good at this, right? And like it's all in the sports news, and everybody's like excited about it. Oh my god, they're gonna finally meet each other in the ring, and it's gonna be really cool. Wow! And sometimes these boxing matches are just really disappointing compared to that. And the one I want to mention is a boxing match from the 80s somewhere between Mike Tyson and a guy called Michael Spinks or something. Built up for massive amounts of time, like lots and lots and lots of build up. Finally, the day occurs. 20,000 plus people are in this arena. Whoa, can't wait to see these people fight. Lots of people have paid lots of money to watch this on pay-per-view TV. Nothing could be more exciting than this fight. And they start, and it's over within 91 seconds. Like a minute and a half, and it's all done. Michael Spinks is knocked out, Mike Tyson won, and it's all finished. That is what I would call an anticlimax in real life, right? Imagine being a boxing fan. Imagine being like, oh my god, I can't wait to finally see these two top-tuned athletes whack each other on the face with their boxing gloves. Whee! That's because that's what fans would say. And, you've invited your friends over to watch it on pay-per-view, and you have all the snacks ready, and you've got, like, your boxing hat on. Isn't that what you do? Like, that's what they do in soccer, right? You put, like, a hat on. That sort of indicates that now I'm a sports fan. Whee! I don't know what the hell you do, but anyway, they're excited, right? I mean, I completely understand that part. I can be building up to something exciting, and I can't wait for this to happen, and I can't wait to finally see this event happen, And all your friends are over there, and like, oh my god, they finally start. Hey, round 1, round 2. Oh, it's done. That has to be so disappointing. Like, you paid so much money to see it, so it's not cheap to watch a boxing match on pay-per-view, I've been told. So, I mean, that can't be great. But anyway, I think I've told you what I mean. I did, however, do a bit of a calculation because Mike Tyson won $22 million for winning this fight. $22 million in the 80s even. It's just ridiculous amount of money for 91 seconds of work. So I did a bit of a calculation and I discovered that his hourly wage would have been $870 million dollars for an hour's work. You know, he didn't have that hourly wage for very long, but he was making that money per hour. And actually, if you looked at the average hourly wage in the 1989 or wherever it was, across the entire world and multiply that up by how many people were in the world at that time, he made 15% of every possible wage at that time. He earned 50% of everybody's money during those 91 seconds. And we're talking worldwide here. That's pretty ridiculous. So it's not anticlimactic for Mike Tyson. I mean, it must have been, it's clearly the biggest amount of money ever made by a single person, probably in 91 seconds in history. So for him, that must have been great. But for the boxing fans, oh lordy. So there are lots of examples of anticlimactic events in world history, of course. So I had to sort of choose some, and the choices I made was I'm going to make ones that have something to do with the letter A, because that's how this channel works, right? So here come a couple of examples of anticlimactic events, starting with the letter A, or at least inspired somehow by people's or places called something with A, right? We shall start by talking about Mr. Al Capone. A is for Al Capone. Al Capone was a naughty boy. That's what he was. In the 1930s, he was running organized crime in Chicago, and he was a very famous gangster, which to me, it strikes me, that's odd. If you're a criminal, right, you shouldn't be famous. It seems like if you're doing something wrong, if you're trying to break the law and you're famous for breaking the law, something is weirdly wrong. I mean, I guess because organized crime has slightly different problems because they can sort of hide their crime within all kinds of middlemen and stuff. So maybe that's it. But I don't know. I mean, he was famous at the time. It's not like later when he was discovered, he became famous like a serial killer or something. This was while he was being the criminal. He was being like when he showed up at a ball game in Chicago, everybody was like, "Yay, Al Capone, criminal! Yay, he's famous!" And he really liked it. He loved that kind of attention. He's a strange guy. Anyway, what did the organized mafia? Let's just call it what it is, mafia, right? Mafia-style organized crime stuff. What were they doing in Chicago in the 1930s when Al Capone was the bad boy? Well, mainly making alcohol, really, because the US in the 1920s and 30s had this really strange social experiment where they decided that alcohol is now illegal. We can't have alcohol because alcohol is naughty and you get drunky-wunk. And if you get drunky-wunk, you are not praying to God enough or something. I can't remember the arguments. They were pretty religious. But the point was, alcohol bad, therefore alcohol illegal. Now, we have the same with drugs nowadays, many drugs, like including relatively harmless drugs like weed and stuff, which, you know, come on. It's getting legalized now in many places, and it seems sane to legalize it, but that's a completely different discussion. The point is, what happens when something is legal, like alcohol, and then suddenly it's not legal anymore? You can have two choices, dear listener. Either people go, oh, that lovely weir wine and beer, not weir and bine. This lovely wine and beer, which I've enjoyed my entire life, has suddenly become illegal. I will now never even think about it again. La la la, give me the water. That's one option. The other option has been like, somebody just made my delicious wine and beer illegal. I want it. Guess which one that was. So, of course, what happens in the US is that lots and lots and lots of illegal alcohol production and distribution happens. Basically, the same way that people get drugs, they got alcohol. You'd go to an illegal guy who, you know, was doing naughty things and selling naughty stuff to, you know, people who wanted something to drink, right? And really quickly, as always happens, just with drugs nowadays, organized crime takes over and starts running the show. So if you wanted to get some booze, you would have to get in touch with a gangster. That's how the Americans' society was working at the time. And they had all kinds of secret bars and, production of alcohol is pretty easy. You can make alcohol by mistake, really. You just have to leave something sugary and something yeasty alone, and you just basically make alcohol all by yourself. I made this mistake once because I remember once I decided to peel a bunch of carrots, yes, and put them all in a nice big glass jar, and I closed the jar up, and I thought, okay, I'll leave those until I want them, because I thought that's going to work, right? And what turns out that some natural yeast had gotten into the water in the jar, and the carrots had natural sugars in them. So when I opened up the jar and tried a carrot, the carrot really tasted like vodka. Let's just put it that way. It was just crammed full of alcohol because of this natural production of alcohol from yeast and sugar. So I didn't eat my vodka carrots, but it's that easy to make alcohol. So lots of people were making alcohol, of course. Anyway, back to Al Capone. Al Capone got arrested finally, died in prison, I think. I don't care. But the thing was, he lived the high life, because he was rich, in a suite in the Lexington Hotel in Chicago. And when they were renovating it, they discovered that he had lots of secret tunnels from the suite in the Lexington Hotel, down to a lot of these illegal bars and like brothels and stuff. And he had like escape routes to get away from the police, and it was all super exciting. And there was a vault, a safe, a big ass safe, which nobody had opened, and suddenly was discovered this super secret safe where it could be anything. It could be like, nobody knew what was going to be inside. There's going to be like riches and gold and money, maybe, or dead people. Who knows? Anything could be in that vault. And what happened was, some journalist on a big TV network called Geraldo Rivera managed to get the rights to open up this safe live on TV. He was given the option, or he managed to sort of convince whoever could make that decision to leave the safe unopened until he could open it live on national television, and he did. And it was like a 2-hour special, and lots of people were watching, and it was like really exciting for everyone. And he was hyping it like hell. And he had like ambulance people, like coroners there, ready to deal with all the scary dead bodies that would be inside, and like people from the tax service to make sure that the money got put away properly, and all the gold and all that. It was so exciting. And finally, they opened the safe, and inside there was an empty bottle. And that was it. It was completely empty, aside from a bit of junk. And that was on live TV, and that was incredibly embarrassing for Geraldo, of course. And people were quite disappointed, naturally. Somehow it did not destroy his career. You'd have thought that would have kind of knocked him off, but no, it didn't. He managed to end up having a relatively well-functioning career being an idiot on Fox News, and he still is today, as a sort of a right-wing pundit, and says lots of stupid shit. I said it again. Something similar happened on a TV show where divers had gotten hold of a safe in a sunken ship, which was expected to be full of silver and wee stuff, like lots of expensive treasure. And when they finally opened up the safe, nothing at all. It was just completely empty, aside from a bunch of paper, which was useless. So that happened. But the safe itself is interesting because it was aboard a ship that sunk because of the biggest stupid maritime disaster, like probably ever. The ship was called the SS. What was it called? The SS Andrea Doria. That's what they're. And the SS Andrea Doria was an Italian ship sailing between New York and Italia, because this was very normal at the time. We're talking like 1950s, maybe, I don't know, before air traffic becomes a thing, right? Like commercial airlines were not doing anything. So if you wanted to go to the US from Europe, you'd sail. So this was an Italian liner, and the Italian liner was sailing around in the fog close to New York. And what happened was that there was another ocean liner, this one a Swedish one, doing the exact same thing, and that was in fog as well, and they got close to each other, way too close to each other. This was before GPS or anything useful, so they didn't know that they were about to smack into each other. But they finally got like radio contact with each other, these two huge ships, and discovered that they were on a collision course, so they made evasive action. The problem being that Swedish evasive action is quite different from Italian evasive action. Italians, because their cars drive on the right, will swerve to the right, because they assume that the other person is to the right of them, and that the natural way of evading is swerving to the right. So that is Italian policy. You swerve to the right because everybody, does the same thing, and if people are heading towards each other, which they were heading straight onto each other. If they're both heading towards each other, if they both go to the right, they avoid each other, right? Sweden, however, at this time, drove on the left. Yes. So they swerved to the left. And, of course, what happens is if two ships are heading straight towards each other, and one swerves to the right and the other one swerves to the left, they basically just aim even more at each other. And that's exactly what happened. They torpedoed each other completely, and the ships sunk. And it's a complete mess. Amazingly, and quite luckily, not many people died in the sinking ship, because it had quite a lot of time to sink. It spent quite a lot of time deciding to sink, essentially, and there was lots of time to get people saved, and people didn't panic and stuff, which is quite impressive. I mean, if I was an Italian and I was on a ship and suddenly I was torpedoed by the Swedish, I would panic a little bit. I don't know. It just seems like a scary thing to happen. But apparently people just chilled. And it did, not to say anything about Italians, they're great, but they're also not the most chill people in the world. So maybe, it's I don't know. I would have expected quite a lot of passion there, but maybe there was, but at least they saved themselves, and it was great. So, no big, massive problem there. However, let's just talk a little bit about this thing about Swedish people driving on the left, because I'm sure you're thinking, like, no, they don't, they drive on the right, and they do. They drive on the right now, but they had to switch. They decided to switch in 1967 or something. They switched from the left to the right. And this is the only country that has switched sides in, that late. There have been other countries that switched, but they switched in the 30s or something, where there are not all that many cars. But in 1967, there's cars and trucks and everything everywhere. And switching from the left to the right was a huge undertaking. Like, imagine all this stuff. There are one-way streets, there are crossings, there are roundabouts, and everything has to be, like, slipways onto motorways, and all this kind of stuff has to be inverted. Giant decision. And the reason they had to do it was because, of course, Sweden has a huge land border with Norway, and Norway was driving on the right, and it was just incredibly inconvenient to be having to switch sides when you just drive from one country to the other. It also has a huge land border with Finland, and same problem. So it's just didn't work. They had to switch. But try to imagine, dear viewer, how well that went. Like, they had a huge information campaign about, remember, from tomorrow, you have to, we ban all traffic on the roads, for 5 hours in the middle of the night or something, to make sure that there's not going to be huge chaos. And then when you're allowed to drive again, remember, now you drive on the right. Oh, I forgot. Another reason they wanted to switch to the right was that most Swedish people bought their cars in Europe, which all had the steering wheel on the left side, which is the side that you have the steering wheel if you drive on the right. So they were driving on the left, and the steering wheel was on the left, which means that the driver was pretty much, almost not even on the road. He's right on the edge of the road. And then when you're passing each other and sitting on the wrong side of the car, you can't see what you're doing, and there's just a huge bunch of collisions. So it was a really needed change, because there's lots of crashes just because the driver can't see where he is, because he's not even in the middle of the road. You see the problem. So they had this switch, and of course what happens is that half the people knew about this. Well, most people probably had heard that there was the switch, and they knew it was going to happen. And of course there are some idiots who hadn't kept up and didn't know, or didn't understand that it was today or something. It's just, there's always going to be fools who don't listen to stuff. And of course, that was no different. There was a bunch of people who had the exact same problem. So there was a lot of collisions and lots of crashes, and a bunch of people blaming each other, being like, what are you doing? You're on the wrong side of the road. No, you're on the right side of the road. But you weren't listening hadn't you listened to the news? What are you talking about news? You're just driving on the wrong side of the road, you freak. And this was all happening in Swedish. So imagine the Swedish chef from the Muppets and we're great, because that is, of course, Swedish. My apologies to any Swedish people listening. I know that's not right. I'm so sorry. But yeah, that was a huge mess, of course. But yeah, it worked. It worked. It happened. So let's talk about another anticlimax, shall we? I want to talk about a war, which is called the Anglo-Zanzibar War. So it begins with an A. So that's a legal topic for me to talk about. The Anglo-Zanzibar War is a war from 1896. Now, the thing about wars from 1896, and Anglo, of course, meaning that the Brits are involved, you have to remember two things. At this point in time, there is such a thing as the British Empire. So the British Empire is huge and dominant and all this kind of stuff. That's the first thing you kind of have to remember, that there's probably going to be some kind of empire stuff going on. The other thing you have to remember about the British Empire in general is that it's just a really selfish pig of a nation. The British Empire has done a lot of terrible, terrible things, and I will not make any excuses for any of those. What I will do is switch to a larger canvas, so I have something to do. So, the Anglo-Zanzibar War, caused by British selfishness, I suppose, like political selfishness, is as follows. It actually all starts in a really strange way. Zanzibar is in Africa, okay? And Zanzibar has its own culture, or its own sort of history, of course, and its own rulers and stuff. And then suddenly it's told that it's been traded from Germany, which is a country it doesn't know, probably. It doesn't have any sense of what Germany even is. It's been traded from Germany to the British Empire, which it doesn't understand what is either. And it's been traded in a really weird geopolitical trade-off between something called Heligoland, which are islands really up north, really far up north, in the northern part of Germany, which used to belong to Denmark until the Napoleonic Wars, until Denmark, which has always been a bit of a coward on the geopolitical stage, it was on Napoleon's side until they realized that Napoleon was going to lose, and then they switched over to the English side and gave these islands to the English. So the English had a bit of island, which the Germans wanted. So the Germans were like, can we have Heligoland, please? We have Zanzibar, which is this weird place in Africa. Would you like that instead? And the Brits were like, sure, fine, whatever. So they were suddenly, these poor Zanzibarians were under the auspices of what can only be described as a very selfish and very nasty little empire. Not little, of course, huge empire, known as the British one. So once we had that, we are now, they are now stuck with a bit of a problem, because part of the treaty that made Zanzibar British, between the Germans and the Brits, let's just remember, the Zanzibarians themselves have nothing to say about this, but the Germans and the Brits decided that they can't change king without the British people sort of being like, okay, we like that king, he can be king. But if we don't like the king, it's not fair. They're not allowed to have that king if the Brits don't like the king. You see that? Super fair. Interestingly enough, the British called this a protectorate. So in the British optics, they were like, yeah, we're looking forward. We're protecting Zanzibar by basically just completely controlling them, you know. But there you go. Once again, here we have the glories of empire building, and the glories of the British Empire in particular. So in this protectorate, they were told, I don't know, they were told, but at least it was legally okay for the Brits to sort of demand that they accepted this king. It wasn't a problem to begin with, because the king they had was fine. He was very British friendly. But what happened was that he was poisoned by somebody who was not particularly British friendly, and the guy who was not British friendly and who poisoned the nice one said, "Now I'm the king! Hooray! I poisoned the king, so now I'm the king." That's how things work. And the Brits were like, no, no, we don't like you, and we have a treaty that says that we are allowed to demand that we have to sort of say that it's okay for you to be the king. Poison guy says, wait, no, what? That's not how anything works. I poisoned the king, now I'm the king. That's what? No. So the Brits are like, I think you forgot to read the treaty, my friend. You have now broken the law, and we are allowed to declare a war on you. So the British Empire declared a war on Zanzibar, and thus the Anglo-Zanzibar War began. It's a formal war, it was declared, and it started in 1896. Now, a little aside, let's just remember how wars used to be, right? There's something called the 30-Year War, which lasted for about 30 years. We had something called the 100 Years' War, which lasted for about 100 years, you know? Wars are long, torrid, nasty businesses at this time. I mean, even in the 20th century, where wars are sort of forced to go to burn out quicker because we have much more dangerous weaponry, even then, we have wars which last for years. We have the First World War, which is 4 years long. We have the Second World War, which is 5 years long, and so on and so on. You know, the Vietnam War lasts for years, blah, blah, blah. So the Anglo-Zanzibar War begins in 1896, and it ends in 1896. Actually, it ends 38 minutes after it begins. That is why it's an anticlimax. It is the shortest war in history. It has never, ever been a war, which was a formal war, declared, all that kind of stuff, that lasted shorter. It was, what we can only say, a deeply unfair war. The Brits said to the poison guy, look, you're not allowed to be the king, go away. And instead of going away, the poison guy said, no, I will fight the British Empire with my soldiers. And he mounted a defence. And the Brits were just like, oh, fine. And they just bombed his palace with a big gunship. And within 38 minutes, 500 people of the poison guy's army was dead. But it was a fair war because, on the other side, a British soldier hurt his foot a bit. And that was the casualties on the English side. One hurt foot. 38 minutes later, Zanzibar declares they surrender, and Poison Guy runs to Germany in a pointed irony. And he, well, not Germany, obviously. That would be quite a long trip. He runs to a part of Africa right next door, which is Germany. And he spends the entire rest of his life in exile in various places until he just dies. So that was not the best coup in the world. There are quite a lot of anticlimactic coups, actually. I can maybe spend the last minutes just mentioning one more. It doesn't begin with an A, but I'm reminded of an attempt to overthrow the Japanese government by a Japanese guy who thought that, you know, I will now overthrow the emperor of Japan and bring forth a new wonderful regime of fairness and yada yada yada. He's a very idealistic guy. I can't remember his name at all. But he tried and he failed. He, I believe, it was very pathetic. He gathered up his buddies and he sort of stormed the palace in an attempt to sort of, and he kind of hoped that the people would rise up immediately and be just like on his side and support him in everything he wanted to do. And the Japanese people were just like, nah, I don't know, no, not really, I don't really know. No, thanks. They weren't. It was not even like a big conflict or anything. It just nobody really took it seriously. And the guy, I think he was an author or something, I don't know. The guy, this idealistic poety author kind of person who thought that he was going to make history and like change Japan for the better, tried to overthrow Japan and completely failed. And being Japanese, of course, he was bound by these odd senses of honor. And he is actually on record of being the last person who committed seppuku, or harakiri, as it's sometimes known. Because he was so dishonored from this failed coup, he committed harakiri, which is this intensely Japanese concept of, you know, killing yourself in a very honorable way to prove that you understand that, you know, your honor is intact if you die in this way. So you kneel and you slice yourself open with a sword, and you have a guy next to you who's your friend, who has promised to chop your head off when that happens, because apparently it's quite painful to cut yourself open with a sword. So you have to stick the sword into your belly and like you yank it to one side and everything spills out. And at that very moment, your friend chops your head off. It's very weird, to be honest. But that's what I don't know. I think maybe they also failed the head chopping bit. It's look into it. It's very sad in many ways. In any case, I only have 5 seconds left, so I'm going to have to just end the video by saying thank you for listening, and that was fun.